Hey, what's going on YouTube? This is Dark Matter Editing, bringing you the very first Vegas Pro tutorial. Now today's tutorial is going to be talking all about project properties and why it matters. Now, when you're loading up Vegas for the first time, especially as a new user, you're going to want to set your project properties. Now, me personally, I like my project properties to match my source content. That way I get an accurate representation of what it's going to look like when I actually go to render everything out. Now, you'll notice in the center here, here's your project, 1980 by 1080. And then we have 60p, which is the frame rate, basically, of the representation. Everything that you see on the right here is virtually what it's going to look like when it renders out. Now, if you want to see exactly what it would look like, you want to hit this little box here, go to Best, and go to Full. And then that will kind of give you the most accurate depiction of what it's going to look like. But for right now, I'm just going to go ahead and move that back to Preview Auto. Okay, so let's go ahead and jump right in. We're going to go ahead and hit File. We're going to go to Properties. And we're going to go ahead and set the groundwork. So for me personally, I like to record in 4K at 60 FPS. But most people on YouTube or in real life are going to have, like, say, a 1080p monitor. Or maybe they record in 1080p on their phone or something like that. I myself, I film a lot of video game content, so I'll be filming in 4K. But let's say you film a lot of video game content, or let's say you have a camera that's in 1080p. So you're going to want to find what your monitor's resolution is, or your content's resolution. So 1080p, we know, that's a quick Google search, is 1980 by 1080. So that's what you would type into these two boxes here, width 1980, height 1080. HDR, it's going to be kind of a rarely used feature. HDR is it's great, but not a lot of people use it these days, especially for gaming. You can see a lot of people using it for movies too. But if your content's not in HDR, just leave that on off. You're going to know what these other two settings mean if you know a lot about HDR, so it's not a big deal. Field order, you're going to want to leave that on none. That's fine. Pixel aspect ratio, I recommend always leaving it on square unless you know what you're doing on these other options. Output, you can just leave that at 0. Frame rate. Now, this is the one that's going to be most important. I like my project properties to match my content. So if I film something like a video game and say 60 FPS, I want this to say 60 too, so I can see exactly what I'm looking at on the right. So go ahead and type 60. And even though a lot of these windows have a drop down, you can actually hand key a lot of this stuff. So just keep that in mind. Pixel format, again, leave that on 8-bit unless you know what you're doing. 8-bit's kind of the default. A lot of these other things are going to be kind of grayed out. Full resolution, always recommend this on best. Computers these days are pretty darn good, so unless you have a really old computer, just leave that on best. And you could try the others if that's the case for you. Motion blur, leave that on Gaussian. Deinterlace, leave that on blend, that's fine. And resample mode, this is important. Now, this one here can kind of blur frames together, and I really do not like that. I like everything to look as raw and as source as possible. So I'll change this to disable if it's set to something else. You might see frame blend. I really don't like that, so leave that on disable. Then when you render, everything will, no matter what, this resample mode will be on disable. Adjust source media to better match project. You could leave that on. If you have these settings set up, it doesn't really matter because it's going to match your content. So you could leave that check. That's fine. Just skip this here, the second box. And then last box, this one here, start all new projects with these settings. I personally will keep that checked on because all my content's 4K 60. I literally make no changes outside of that. And when I do, I would just go in here and hand key a new template. So if you have the same output or render resolution and frame rate every time, you're definitely going to want to click this box. It saves you a lot of time when you load up a new project, for example. So hit apply, and then if you go up here, you can type in what you want to call it. So I could do 1080p2, for example. And then you want to hit the save box. So when you hit this drop down, now your template is going to be inside this menu. So if you load up a new Sony Vegas, you can go up to File, Properties, and pick the one you want for your new project. Well, I hope that made sense. The only other tab that I would recommend is maybe audio. I don't really touch this. I usually it defaults to the right sample rate, which is 48 hertz for me. All my content's in that. You could change this to best here, this resample and stretched, which is fine. But honestly, it's not going to make that big of a difference. There's a little button here where you could choose if you want 5.1 surround output or stereo, but chances are if you're doing anything other than stereo, you're really good with this program already. So, but that's going to be it for today. Hope everyone learned something, and I'll see you guys on the next one.